In the shadowed halls of Blackwood Manor, a scream shatters the midnight silence. Lady Eleanor Blackwood, the matriarch of a fractured family, lies dead, poisoned in her locked room. Was it greed, revenge, or a secret too dark to bear? Hercule Poirot, the brilliant Belgian detective, steps into a web of lies where every suspect hides a motive, every clue conceals a truth, and time is running out. Who betrayed the lady of the manor, and what deadly secret did she take to her grave? Unravel the mystery in this gripping tale of deception and deduction. Chapter 1. The Gathering at Blackthorn Manor. In the waning days of an English autumn, when the leaves of Kent turned to fiery hues and the air carried the crisp promise of winter, Blackthorn Manor stood as a monument to opulence and secrecy. Nestled deep in the countryside, its ivy-clad walls and towering gables loomed over the rolling hills, a silent witness to the dramas of its inhabitants. The manor, owned by the wealthy and enigmatic Sir Reginald Ashbourne, was a place where the veneer of civility often masked deeper currents of ambition, envy, and deceit. It was here, on a foggy evening in late October, that a gathering of carefully chosen guests assembled, unaware that fate had already begun to weave its intricate web. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal companion of Hercule Poirot, found himself invited to Blackthorn Manor under somewhat mysterious circumstances. Sir Reginald, a retired industrialist with a penchant for collecting rare antiquities, had extended the invitation through a mutual acquaintance, citing a weekend of intellectual discussion and fine dining. Hastings, whose appetite for adventure was matched only by his fondness for good company, accepted with enthusiasm, though he could not shake a nagging sense that there was more to the invitation than met the eye. As his motor car wound its way up the gravel drive, Hastings took in the grandeur of the manor. The windows glowed with the warm light of chandeliers, and the faint strains of a gramophone drifted through the evening mist. He adjusted his tie, smoothed his mustache, and stepped out into the chill air, his breath forming fleeting clouds. A butler, impeccably dressed and with an air of quiet efficiency, greeted him at the door. "Captain Hastings, I presume?" the butler said, his voice as smooth as polished mahogany. "Sir Reginald is expecting you. Please, this way." The entrance hall was a marvel of oak paneling and marble, adorned with portraits of stern-faced Ashbournes from centuries past. Hastings followed the butler into a drawing room where the guests were already gathered, their voices a low hum of polite conversation. The room was a study in elegance, heavy velvet curtains, a roaring fire in the grate, and a long table set with crystal and silver. Yet beneath the surface, Hastings sensed an undercurrent of tension, as though each guest were playing a role in a carefully rehearsed drama. Sir Reginald Ashbourne stood at the center of the room, a tall man in his late 50s, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see through one's very soul. His presence commanded attention, though his smile was warm as he greeted Hastings. "Captain Hastings, how good of you to join us," Sir Reginald said, extending a hand. "I trust the journey was not too taxing?" "Not at all, Sir Reginald," Hastings replied, shaking the offered hand. "Your home is quite magnificent." "Kind of you to say so," Sir Reginald said, his smile tightening ever so slightly. "Allow me to introduce you to the others." The guests were a diverse assembly, each a distinct thread in the tapestry of the evening. First was Lady Beatrice Ashbourne, Sir Reginald's wife, a woman of striking beauty whose delicate features belied a sharp intelligence. Her emerald gown shimmered in the firelight, and her eyes flicked towards Hastings with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Beside her stood Dr. Malcolm Fraser, a physician of some renown, whose gaunt frame and nervous fingers suggested a man perpetually on edge. His wife, Eleanor Fraser, was a contrast in vivacity, her laughter ringing out as she chatted with a young man named Julian Carver. Carver, a journalist with a reputation for uncovering scandals, had a boyish charm that masked a calculating mind. His presence at the manor was curious, for Sir Reginald was known to distrust the press. Next was Miss Clara Wentworth, a spinster of indeterminate age whose prim demeanour and sharp tongue made her a formidable presence. She clutched a glass of sherry as though it were a shield, her eyes darting about the room. Finally, there was Victor Langston, a business associate of Sir Reginald's, whose booming voice and ruddy complexion suggested a man accustomed to getting his way. As Hastings exchanged pleasantries, he noted the subtle dynamics at play. Lady Beatrice's smile never quite reached her eyes when she spoke to her husband. Dr. Fraser's hand trembled as he sipped his wine, and Eleanor's laughter seemed forced, as though masking some private worry. Carver's gaze lingered too long on Clara Wentworth, who responded with a frosty glare, and Victor Langston, for all his bluster, seemed to watch Sir Reginald with a mixture of deference and resentment. Dinner was announced, and the party moved to the dining room, where a feast of roast pheasant, glazed vegetables, and fine claret awaited. The conversation flowed easily at first, touching on politics, literature, and the latest London gossip. Yet as the evening progressed, cracks began to appear. Sir Reginald spoke of a recent acquisition, a rare Egyptian amulet said to carry a curse, and his tone grew almost taunting as he described its value. "A trinket perhaps to some," he said, his eyes sweeping the table. "But to those who understand its history, it is priceless. I keep it locked in my study naturally. One cannot be too careful."
Clara Wentworth's lips pursed. "Superstition is a poor substitute for reason, Sir Reginald. Curses are nonsense." "Perhaps," Sir Reginald replied, his smile enigmatic. "But history has a way of proving skeptics wrong." The conversation shifted, but Hastings noted the unease that lingered. Eleanor Fraser spilled a drop of wine, her hand unsteady, and Dr. Fraser quickly covered her mistake with a forced laugh. Julian Carver asked pointed questions about Sir Reginald's business dealings, earning a sharp look from Langston. Lady Beatrice, meanwhile, seemed to withdraw into herself, her fingers toying with the pearls at her throat. As dessert was served, a decadent chocolate torte, Sir Reginald rose to make a toast. "To friendship," he said, raising his glass, "and to secrets, which make life so very interesting." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Hastings felt a prickle of unease, as though the room itself were holding its breath. He glanced at each guest, their faces a gallery of polite masks, and wondered what lay beneath. The evening drew to a close, and the guests retired to their rooms. Hastings, however, lingered in the drawing room, his mind turning over the evening's events. There was something amiss, though he could not yet put his finger on it. The manor, for all its grandeur, felt like a stage set for a tragedy. As he made his way to his room, he passed Sir Reginald's study, its door slightly ajar. A faint light flickered within, and for a moment he thought he heard a whisper, a low, urgent voice. He hesitated, then decided against intruding. Whatever secrets Blackthorn Manor held, they would not be revealed tonight. Yet, as he climbed the stairs, the weight of the evening settled upon him. The polite smiles, the guarded glances, the undercurrents of tension, all pointed to a puzzle that was only beginning to take shape. Little did he know that the morrow would bring a crime that would shake the very foundations of Blackthorn Manor, and that his old friend, Hercule Poirot, would soon be called upon to unravel its mysteries. For now, the manor slept, its secrets locked tight within its walls. But secrets, like shadows, have a way of creeping into the light. Chapter 2. The Shadow Falls. The morning after the dinner at Blackthorn Manor dawned grey and heavy, with a mist that clung to the Kentish hills like a shroud. Captain Arthur Hastings awoke to the distant tolling of a church bell, its mournful notes echoing through the stillness. He dressed with his usual care, adjusting his tie in the mirror and smoothing his moustache, but a sense of unease lingered from the previous evening. The polished civility of the guests, the cryptic remarks of Sir Reginald, and the faint whisper he had overheard outside the study, all seemed to hint at a drama yet to unfold. Breakfast was served in the dining room, though the atmosphere set with silver and porcelain, but the air was thick with tension. Lady Beatrice presided over the meal with a strained smile, her eyes darting to the empty chair at the head of the table. Sir Reginald was conspicuously absent. "Where is Sir Reginald?" Hastings ventured, breaking the silence as he helped himself to a slice of toast. Lady Beatrice's hand paused over her teacup, "He often takes an early walk," she said, her voice light but brittle. "The grounds are quite extensive, and he enjoys the solitude." Dr. Malcolm Fraser, seated opposite, exchanged a glance with his wife, Eleanor, whose usual vivacity seemed dimmed. "Odd time for a walk with this fog," he muttered, his fingers tapping nervously on the tablecloth. Julian Carver, the journalist, leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. "Perhaps he's guarding that precious amulet of his," he said, a hint of mockery in his tone. "Can't be too careful with cursed artifacts, can we?" Clara Wentworth, seated at the far end, sniffed disapprovingly. "Nonsense. Sir Reginald is a man of reason, not superstition." Victor Langston, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. "He's a man of business, Miss Wentworth, and business, as we all know, can be a dangerous game." The conversation faltered, and Hastings noted the undercurrents of unease. The absence of their host cast a pall over the gathering, and each guest seemed preoccupied with their own thoughts. He resolved to take a stroll himself, hoping the fresh air might clear his mind. The grounds of Blackthorn Manor were as grand as the house itself, with manicured lawns giving way to dense woods and a small ornamental lake. The mist hung low, obscuring the horizon, and the air was damp and cool. Hastings wandered toward the lake, his boots crunching on the gravel path, when he heard a shout from the direction of the house. "Captain Hastings, come quickly!" It was the butler, his normally composed face pale and drawn. "It's Sir Reginald. He's been found!" Hastings hurried back, his heart pounding. The butler led him to the edge of the woods, where a small group had gathered. Lady Beatrice stood rigid, her hands clasped tightly, while Dr. Fraser knelt beside a figure lying motionless on the ground. Julian Carver and Victor Langston stood nearby, their expressions a mix of shock and suspicion. Clara Wentworth hovered at the periphery, her face ashen. Sir Reginald Ashbourne lay sprawled among the fallen leaves, his silver hair matted with blood. A heavy bronze statuette, shaped like an Egyptian falcon, lay beside him, its surface stained crimson. His eyes stared blankly at the sky, and a single wound at the base of his skull told a grim story. "He's dead," Dr. Fraser. Hastings knelt beside the body, his military training prompting him to observe the scene with care. The ground was soft from recent rain, and he noted several sets of footprints leading to and from the spot. A cigarette stub, still faintly warm, lay a few feet away, its brand unfamiliar. The statuette, clearly the murder weapon, was an odd choice, too heavy to carry easily, suggesting the crime was opportunistic rather than planned. "We must call the police," Victor Langston said, his voice gruff. "And no one should touch anything until they arrive." "Quite right," Hastings agreed, though his mind was already racing. The scene felt staged, as though the killer had left clues deliberately or perhaps carelessly. He thought of his old friend, Hercule Poirot, whose keen mind would surely make sense of this chaos. "I shall telephone a friend," he added. "Monsieur Poirot will know what to do." The group returned to the manor, where the butler placed a call to the local constabulary. Hastings, meanwhile, sent a wire to Poirot, who was staying at a nearby inn on a rare holiday. The message was brief but urgent. "Murder at Blackthorn Manor. Come at once. Hastings." Within the hour, the police arrived, led by Inspector Grayson, a dour man with a penchant for jumping to conclusions. He surveyed the scene, barked orders to his constables, and began questioning the guests. His suspicions quickly fell on Victor Langston, whose business dealings with Sir Reginald had reportedly soured in recent months. "Langston, you were seen arguing with Sir Reginald last week," Inspector Grayson said, his tone accusatory. "Care to explain?" Langston's face reddened. "A disagreement over contracts. Nothing more. I had no reason to kill him." Hastings watched the exchange, noting the defensiveness in Langston's posture. Yet he also observed the others. Lady Beatrice's tightly controlled grief, Dr. Fraser's nervous fidgeting, Eleanor's forced calm, Carver's sharp-eyed curiosity, Clara Wentworth's icy detachment. Each had a motive, he realized, whether it was money, jealousy, or a hidden grudge. As the police cordoned off the crime scene, a familiar figure appeared at the manor's gates. Hercule Poirot, immaculate in his patent leather shoes and neatly pressed suit, stepped from a taxi with an air of calm authority. His moustache was as pristine as ever, and his green eyes sparkled with intellectual curiosity. "Mon ami Hastings," Poirot exclaimed, clasping his friend's hand. "You have a talent for finding trouble, n'est-ce pas? Tell me everything." Hastings recounted the events of the previous evening and the grim discovery that morning. Poirot listened intently, his head tilted slightly, his fingers steepled before him. When Hastings mentioned the bronze statue
"Near the body, about 3 feet away," Hastings replied. "It was still warm, so it must have been dropped recently." Poirot nodded, his mind already at work. "The little grey cells, they begin to stir. This is no random act, Hastings. The killer has left us a puzzle, and we shall solve it." He approached the crime scene, where Inspector Grayson was still barking orders. Poirot examined the body, the statuette, and the footprints with meticulous care, his gloved hands moving with precision. He paused at the cigarette stub, sniffing it delicately before slipping it into an envelope. "A clue, perhaps," he said softly. "But we must not assume. Assumptions, Hastings, are the enemy of truth." As the police continued their work, Poirot requested a tour of the manor. The butler led them through the grand halls, past the study where Sir Reginald kept his prized amulet. The door was now locked, but Poirot's gaze lingered on the keyhole, as though he could see through to the secrets within. Back in the drawing room, the guests were gathered, their faces a mix of fear and suspicion. Poirot stood before them, his small stature belying the weight of his presence. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice calm but commanding. "A tragedy has occurred, and I, Hercule Poirot, shall uncover the truth. Each of you has a story to tell, and I shall listen. But know this, the truth cannot hide from Poirot." The room fell silent, and Hastings felt a shiver run down his spine. The game was afoot, and the shadow that had fallen over Blackthorn Manor would soon be illuminated by the brilliance of Poirot's little grey cells. Chapter 3. The Arrival of Poirot. The fog that had cloaked Blackthorn Manor in an eerie veil began to lift as the morning progressed, but the atmosphere within the grand house grew only heavier. The discovery of Sir Reginald Ashbourne's body had cast a pall over the guests, each of whom now eyed the others with a mixture of suspicion and unease. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing by the drawing-room window, watched as Hercule Poirot's taxi disappeared down the drive, the detective's arrival a beacon of hope amidst the chaos. Poirot's presence, with his meticulous habits and unerring logic, promised to unravel the mystery that had so violently intruded upon the weekend. Poirot, having completed his initial inspection of the crime scene, now stood in the drawing room, his small, neat figure a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. His patent leather shoes gleamed in the light of the chandelier, and his moustache, perfectly symmetrical, seemed to bristle with anticipation. The guests, summoned by the butler, sat or stood in a tense semicircle, their faces a gallery of guarded expressions. Inspector Grayson, the local police officer, hovered near the fireplace, his notebook in hand, clearly irritated by Poirot's arrival.
"This is a matter for the Kent Constabulary. We have the situation well in hand."
Poirot inclined his head, a faint smile playing at his lips.
Mais oui, Inspector, I have no doubt of your competence. But my friend Hastings has requested my assistance, and I cannot refuse. Besides, the little grey cells, they are eager to assist in such a puzzle.
Hastings suppressed a grin. Poirot's humility was, as always, a carefully crafted facade, concealing a mind sharper than any blade. The inspector, however, seemed unimpressed, muttering something about amateurs before returning to his notes. Poirot turned to the assembled guests, his green eyes sweeping over them with an intensity that made several shift uncomfortably.
Mesdames et messieurs,
He began, his voice soft but commanding.
a crime has been committed, and each of you, I am certain, holds a piece of the truth. I ask only that you speak honestly when questioned. The truth, it has a way of revealing itself, but it is aided by candor.
Lady Beatrice Ashbourne, seated on a velvet chaise longue, dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief.
This is dreadful,
She said, her voice trembling.
Reginald was difficult at times, but who could wish him harm?
Poirot's gaze lingered on her, noting the delicate tremor in her hands.
Difficult, madame? In what way?
Lady Beatrice hesitated, her eyes flickering toward the others.
He was a man of strong opinions, she said carefully. Not everyone agreed with his decisions in business or otherwise.
Victor Langston, standing near the window, snorted. That's putting it mildly. Reginald had a knack for making enemies. Half the county had a grudge against him.
Careful, Langston,
Julian Carver interjected, his journalist's instincts evident in his sharp tone.
That sounds like you're pointing fingers. Care to share your own dealings with Sir Reginald?
Langston's face reddened, but before he could retort, Poirot raised a hand.
Peace, messieurs. There will be time for all to speak. For now, I wish to understand the events of this morning. Who last saw Sir Reginald alive?
A heavy silence fell. Dr. Malcolm Fraser cleared his throat, his gaunt face pale. I saw him at around 7 o'clock, he said. He was in the hall, heading toward the front door. Said he was going for a walk.
And you, Doctor, where were you afterward?
Poirot asked, his tone deceptively mild. Fraser's fingers twitched. In my room, preparing for breakfast. Eleanor can confirm that. Eleanor Fraser nodded quickly, perhaps too quickly.
Yes, we were together until we came down at 8.
Poirot's eyes flicked to Clara Wentworth, who sat ramrod straight in an armchair, her lips pursed.
And you, mademoiselle? Your movements this morning?
Clara's eyes narrowed.
Expression unreadable.
Hastings, watching closely, knew this was merely the opening act. Poirot was gathering impressions, noting every gesture, every hesitation. The real questioning would come later, when he had observed enough to detect the contradictions. Inspector Grayson, growing impatient, interrupted. We've already established alibis, Mr. Poirot. Langston was in the billiard room, Carver was in the garden, and Lady Beatrice was in a boudoir. The butler and staff were in the kitchens. We're focusing on the footprints and that statuette. Bon, Poirot said, unruffled. The footprints. They are most interesting. And the statuette, such an unusual choice for a weapon, no? Heavy, cumbersome, not something one carries by chance. Grayson frowned. You're suggesting it was deliberate? I suggest nothing, Inspector. I observe. Poirot turned to the butler, who stood discreetly by the door. Monsieur, this statuette, where was it kept? In Sir Reginald's study, sir, the butler replied. On a shelf near his desk. It was one of his prized possessions, brought back from Cairo. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And the study, it is locked? Yes, sir. Always, unless Sir Reginald was inside. Yet the statuette was found by the body, Poirot mused. Curieux, n'est-ce pas? Hastings felt a familiar thrill. Poirot was already piecing together the puzzle,
though the picture remained obscure. The detective requested to see the study, and the butler led them to a heavy oak door on the ground floor. The lock was intact, but Poirot examined it closely, noting a faint scratch near the keyhole. "Perhaps forced," he murmured, "or perhaps not. We shall see." Inside, the study was a treasure trove of antiquities. Shelves lined with leather-bound books, glass cases displaying artifacts, and a massive desk cluttered with papers. The space where the statuette had stood was conspicuous, a small, dust-free circle on the shelf. Poirot's gaze swept the room, lingering on a half-burned cigarette in an ashtray, its brand matching the stub found near the body. "A clue, Hastings," he said softly. "But whose cigarette, and why leave it here?" They returned to the drawing room, where Poirot began his interviews in earnest. He spoke to each guest privately, his questions seemingly innocuous but designed to probe. Lady Beatrice admitted to a strained marriage, though she insisted she loved her husband. Dr. Fraser revealed that Sir Reginald had been consulting him about a heart condition, which made the choice of a physical attack curious. Eleanor Fraser spoke vaguely of her mourning, her eyes avoiding Poirot's. Julian Carver admitted to sneaking into the garden to smoke, claiming he needed fresh air. Clara Wentworth maintained her story of solitude, though her fingers twisted nervously.
Sir Reginald. As the interviews concluded, Poirot stood by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. "Each of you has a story," he said, addressing the group, "but stories, they are like tapestries. Pull one thread, and the whole may unravel." Inspector Grayson scoffed. "We don't need metaphors, Poirot. We need evidence. Langston's motive is clear, and his footprints match those near the body." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Footprints, Inspector, are like words. They can mislead if not read in context." The guests exchanged uneasy glances, and Hastings felt the tension rise. Poirot was planting seeds of doubt, watching for reactions. Someone in this room, he was certain, knew more than they were saying. The question was who, and what they were hiding. As the day drew to a close, Poirot retired to a quiet corner with Hastings. "Mon ami," he said, his voice low, "this is no simple crime. The statuette, the cigarette, the footprints, they are pieces of a larger design. We must be patient, for the killer will betray themselves, as they always do." Hastings nodded, his mind racing. Blackthorn Manor was a house of secrets, and Poirot was only beginning to peel back its layers. The truth, he knew, was close, but it would require all of Poirot's brilliance to bring it to light. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Blackthorn Manor, but within its walls, the atmosphere remained heavy with suspicion and dread. The murder of Sir Reginald Ashbourne had unsettled the household, and Hercule Poirot's presence, with his piercing gaze and relentless questions, only heightened the tension. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever observant of his friend's methods, noted how Poirot seemed to thrive in this environment, his little grey cells humming with activity as he sifted through the tangled web of clues and motives. Inspector Grayson, determined to assert his authority, had taken Victor Langston into the library for further questioning, convinced that the businessman's financial disputes with Sir Reginald made him the prime suspect. The inspector's heavy-handed approach, however, was beginning to grate on the guests. who whispered among themselves in the drawing-room. Hastings overheard Clara Wentworth mutter to Eleanor Fraser about incompetent policeman, while Julian Carver scribbled furiously in a notebook, no doubt crafting a sensational story for his newspaper. Poirot, meanwhile, had retreated to a corner of the drawing-room.
Motive, the footprints, the statuette. But the obvious, it is often a trap. We must look beyond, to the shadows where the truth hides. Hastings nodded, though he felt a pang of frustration. But Langston does have a motive, Poirot, and those footprints, they match his boots perfectly. Poirot's moustache twitched with amusement. Footprints, Hastings, are like signatures. They can be forged, or they can mislead. Tell me, what do you make of the cigarette stub we found near the body? It's the same brand as the one in Sir Reginald's study, Hastings replied. But no one admitted to smoking it. Could it belong to the killer? Perhaps, Poirot said, his tone enigmatic. Or perhaps it is another red herring, placed to divert us. We must question everything, Hastings, even the clues that seem most certain. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion of the door. Inspector Grayson stormed in, his face flushed with triumph. "We've found something," he announced, holding up a folded piece of paper. "A letter, hidden in Langston's room. It's a demand for repayment of a loan Sir Reginald made to him, dated just last week. The man was desperate." Victor Langston, following close behind, looked furious. "That's preposterous," he bellowed. "I never hid that letter. Someone planted it." The guests erupted in murmurs, their eyes darting between Langston and the inspector. Lady Beatrice, pale and composed, rose from her seat. "Inspector, surely you don't believe Victor would be so careless as to leave such evidence lying about?" Grayson's jaw tightened. "Careless or not, it's damning, and those footprints place him at the scene." Poirot stepped forward, his small frame commanding attention. "Inspector, may I see this letter?" Grayson hesitated, then handed it over with a grudging nod. Poirot unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the text with meticulous care. The letter was indeed a demand for repayment, written in Sir Reginald's precise hand, but Poirot's attention lingered on the paper itself, its weight, its texture, the faint watermark barely visible in the light. "Interesting," Poirot murmured, folding the letter and slipping it into his pocket. "But tell me, Inspector, where exactly in Monsieur Langston's room was this found?" "Under the mattress," Grayson replied. "A clumsy hiding place, if you ask me." "Clumsy indeed," Poirot said, his tone neutral, but his eyes gleaming. "Almost too clumsy, no?" Langston seized the opportunity. "Exactly. I'm being framed, I tell you. Someone wants to pin this on me." Poirot raised a hand for silence. "Patience, Monsieur Langston. The truth, it does not yield to shouting. Let us consider all possibilities." The detective's calm authority quelled the rising tension, but Hastings could see the unease in the guests' faces. Each seemed to be weighing their own secrets, wondering how much Poirot had already deduced. The letter, the footprints, the statuette, all pointed to Langston. But Hastings knew Poirot distrusted such convenient evidence. Determined to test his theory, Poirot requested a private word with the butler, who led them to the servants' quarters. There, Poirot questioned the staff about the morning's events, focusing on the movements of the guests. The housemaid, a nervous young woman named Molly, admitted to seeing Julian Carver in the garden shortly before the body was found, smoking a cigarette. When pressed, she described the brand, a rare French import not commonly found in England. "The same as the stub by the body," Hastings whispered excitedly. Poirot nodded but said nothing, his mind clearly turning over this new information. They returned to the drawing-room, where Poirot announced his intention to examine the garden. Accompanied by Hastings and a reluctant Inspector Grayson, he made his way to the spot where Molly had seen Carver. The garden was a maze of neatly trimmed hedges and rose bushes, still damp from the morning's mist. Poirot knelt near a flower bed, his gloved hands sifting through the soil. After a moment, he produced a small object, a silver cigarette case, engraved with the initials J.C. "Carver's," Hastings said, his eyes widening.
He didn't mention losing this. No, Poirot agreed, slipping the case into an envelope. And yet, here it is, near where the maid saw him smoking. Most curious. Inspector Grayson snorted. So now you're after Carver. Make up your mind, Poirot. Poirot's smile was serene. The mind, Inspector. It must remain open, like a window to let in the light. We collect the pieces, and only then do we see the picture. Back in the drawing room, Poirot confronted Julian Carver with the cigarette case. The journalist's charm faltered for a moment, his eyes narrowing. I must have dropped it, he said smoothly. I was in the garden as I told you, nothing sinister about it. And the cigarette stub near the body, Poirot pressed. It matches the brand you smoke, Monsieur Carver. A French import, no? Carver's smile tightened. Plenty of people smoke those. You can't pin this on me. Poirot said nothing, but his gaze was unrelenting. Hastings could almost hear the gears turning in his friend's mind, sorting through the lies and half-truths. The cigarette case, the letter, the footprints. They were all distractions, designed to obscure the real killer's trail. But who had set these traps, and why? As the day drew to a close, Poirot gathered the guests once more. Mesdames et messieurs, he said, his voice calm but laced with steel. The evidence, it points in many directions. But I, Hercule Poirot, see through the fog of deception. Someone in this room has woven a clever net, but it will not hold. Tomorrow we shall dig deep.
Hastings lingered, watching Poirot as he stood by the fireplace, lost in thought. What do you make of it, Poirot? He asked. Langston's letter, Carver's cigarette case. Are they both red herrings? Poirot's eyes twinkled. The red herring, Hastings, is a fish that smells strongly to distract the hunter. But I, Poirot, am not so easily distracted. We have only begun to unravel this mystery, and the truth, it lies not in what is shown, but in what is hidden. As the manor settled into an uneasy silence, Hastings felt a chill. The killer was among them, watching, waiting. But with Poirot on the case, no secret could remain hidden for long. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The morning sun filtered weakly through the heavy drapes of Blackwood Manor's library, casting a muted glow over the shelves of leather-bound volumes and the polished mahogany table where Hercule Poirot sat, his notebook open before him. The room, with its scent of old paper and wax polish, seemed to hold the secrets of generations, and Poirot, with his meticulous precision, was determined to coax one such secret into the light. Captain Hastings stood by the window, peering out at the snow-covered grounds, his brow furrowed with the restless energy of a man eager for action but tethered to the slower pace of deduction. Poirot's pen moved with deliberate care, jotting down observations from the previous day's interviews. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, darted occasionally to the small objects arranged on the table, a silver cigarette case, a fragment of lace, a crumpled piece of paper bearing the faint imprint of a woman's handwriting, and a single pearl earring. These were the tangible remnants of the crime, each a potential key to unlocking the mystery of Lady Eleanor Blackwood's murder. But it was one item in particular, a small embroidered handkerchief, that held Poirot's attention this morning. Mon ami, Poirot said, his voice cutting through the silence, you are restless, none? You pace like a caged lion, but the solution to this crime lies not in the snow outside, but here in the details before us. Hastings turned, his hands clasped behind his back. I know, Poirot, but it's maddening. Everyone in this house seems to have a motive, yet no one stands out as the obvious culprit. Clara Blackwood with her inheritance, Reginald Thorne with his secretive dealings, Dr. Grayson with his access to poisons, Mrs. Langley with her fierce loyalty, and even young James with his resentment. Any of them could have done it. And yet, we're no closer to the truth. Poirot's moustache twitched with the hint of a smile. Patience, Hastings. The truth is like a fine tapestry. Each thread must be examined closely, for it is in the smallest detail that the pattern emerges. Observe, if you please, this handkerchief. He lifted the delicate square of linen, its edges embroidered with the initials C.B. in a delicate script, near the writing desk in Lady Eleanor's room, a place where no one but the murderer had reason to linger after the household retired for the night. Hastings frowned, stepping closer. Clara Blackwood's handkerchief, then. But surely that's too obvious. Anyone could have planted it to throw suspicion on her. Précisément, Poirot agreed, his eyes gleaming. The obvious is rarely the truth in matters of murder. But let us consider the handkerchief itself. It is not merely a piece of cloth, but a story. The embroidery is fine, the linen of the highest quality, yet it is slightly frayed at one corner, as though it has been clutched tightly, perhaps in a moment of distress. And here, he pointed to a faint smudge near the initials, a trace of ink, almost imperceptible, but present nonetheless. This suggests the handkerchief was near the desk when the murderer acted, perhaps used to wipe a pen or a surface. Hastings leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. So you think the murderer dropped it accidentally? Poirot shook his head. No, Hastings. Hercule Poirot does not believe in accidents. The handkerchief was either left deliberately to mislead or forgotten in a moment of distraction. But there is more. The ink smudge matches the ink in Lady Eleanor's fountain pen, which was found uncapped on the desk. This tells us the murderer was at the desk, perhaps searching for something or writing something, before the poison was administered. Hastings rubbed his chin, his mind racing. The letters. You said yesterday you suspected Lady Eleanor was writing something important, perhaps a new will or a confession. Could the murderer have been looking for those letters? Poirot nodded approvingly. You begin to think like a detective, mon ami. Yes, the letters are key. Lady Eleanor was preparing to reveal a secret, one that threatened someone in this house. The handkerchief, the ink, the stopped clock at 8:47 p.m. These are not random. They point to a moment, a precise moment, when the murderer acted. But let us test this theory further. He rose, his movements precise and deliberate, and crossed to the writing desk in the corner of the library, a replica of the one in Lady Eleanor's room. The police had allowed Poirot to examine the original, but he preferred this quieter setting for his reflections. He opened the desk's drawer, revealing a hidden compartment he had discovered the previous day. Here, he said, is where Lady Eleanor kept her private correspondence. The compartment was forced open, the lock scratched. Someone was desperate to see what was inside. Hastings joined him, peering into the empty compartment. But the letters are gone. The murderer must have taken them. Perhaps, Poirot said, his tone enigmatic. Or perhaps they were hidden elsewhere. Lady Eleanor was a woman of foresight. She would not leave such sensitive documents so easily found. But come, let's speak with the housekeeper, Mrs. Langley. Her devotion to Lady Eleanor may hold the key to this puzzle. They found Mrs. Beatrice Langley in the kitchen, supervising the preparation of luncheon. Her stern face softened slightly at the sight of Poirot, though her eyes remained wary. Mr. Poirot, she said, wiping her hands on her apron, I've told you all I know. Lady Eleanor was a saint, and I'd have given my life for her. I saw nothing unusual that night. Poirot inclined his head, his expression one of polite deference. Madame, I do not doubt your loyalty, but tell me, did Lady Eleanor ever speak of her private papers? A diary, perhaps, or letters she valued? Mrs. Langley hesitated, her hands twisting in her apron. She did keep a diary, sir, but it was private, locked in her desk. I never read it, nor would I. She was particular about her privacy. And the key to this desk? Poirot pressed gently. Did she keep it with her? Mrs. Langley nodded. Always. On a chain around her neck. No one else had access to it. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. Merci, madame. That is most helpful. He turned to Hastings as they left the kitchen. The key, Hastings. The key was not found on Lady Eleanor's body, nor in her room. This is significant. The murderer needed that key to access the compartment, yet it was not there. Where then did it go? Hastings blinked, struggling to keep up. You think the murderer took it? Or, Poirot said, his voice low, the key was never needed. Perhaps the compartment was not the goal, but a distraction. The real secret lies elsewhere, and the handkerchief is our guide. They returned to the library, where Poirot examined the handkerchief once more, holding it to the light. There is something else here, he murmured. Something I did not see before. He produced a small magnifying glass from his pocket and studied the fabric closely. Mon Dieu! It is as I suspected. A tiny thread, caught in the embroidery, does not match the linen. It is silk, Hastings, and it matches the lace found near the body. Hastings' eyes widened. You mean the lace fragment from Lady Eleanor's shawl? But how? Poirot held up a hand. Patience, mon ami. The lace and the handkerchief are connected, not by chance, but by intent. Someone wore Lady Eleanor's shawl, or handled it, and left this thread on the handkerchief. This tells us the murderer was close to the victim, close enough to touch her possessions, and the ink suggests they were at the desk, perhaps reading or writing, at the moment of the crime. He straightened, his expression one of quiet triumph. We are close, Hastings. Very close. The murderer believes they have outwitted us, but they have left their mark in the smallest of details. We must now observe the suspects more closely, for one of them will betray.
As they left the library, the weight of the mystery pressed heavier upon Hastings. The clues were mounting, but so too were the questions. Who had taken the key? What secret did the letters hold? And why had the handkerchief been left behind? Poirot, however, walked with the calm assurance of a man who saw the path ahead, his little grey cells already weaving the threads of truth into a pattern only he could fully discern. Chapter 7. More Lies Surface. The morning sun filtered weakly through the heavy velvet curtains of Blackthorn Manor, casting long shadows across the oak-paneled dining room where the guests had gathered for breakfast. The air was thick with unease, the clink of porcelain and the murmur of strained conversation doing little to mask the tension that had settled over Dude like a fog since the discovery of Sir Reginald Ashford's body. Hercule Poirot sat at the head of the table, his plate untouched, his sharp eyes observing the assembled company with the precision of a watchmaker examining a delicate mechanism. Captain Hastings, seated to his right, buttered a slice of toast with unnecessary vigor, his brow furrowed with the weight of the investigation. Poirot's gaze swept over the suspects, each of whom seemed to wear their secrets like ill-fitting garments. Lady Beatrice Ashford, pale and composed, sipped her tea with a hand that trembled slightly, betraying her outward calm. Her stepson, Lionel Ashford, glowered at his plate, his knuckles white around his fork. Across from him, Miss Clara Wentworth, the governess, sat with her eyes downcast, her delicate features drawn tight with some unspoken worry. The young curate, Mr. Thomas Ridley, fidgeted with his napkin, his nervous energy palpable. Mrs. Evelyn Carver, the housekeeper, maintained her stoic demeanor, but her sharp glances at the others suggested a mind busy with calculations. And Dr. Malcolm Vance, the local physician who had been a guest at the manor the night of the murder, sat with a forced air of nonchalance, his fingers drumming lightly on the tablecloth. The events of the previous evening lingered in Poirot's mind. His subtle probing during dinner had elicited little more than polite deflections, but the undercurrents of deceit had been unmistakable. The discovery of the sapphire brooch in Clara's room had been a misstep, Poirot now suspected, a planted clue meant to mislead. The murderer, he reasoned, was far too clever to leave such an obvious trail. No, the truth lay buried deeper, in the contradictions and silences that his little grey cells were beginning to unravel. Inspector Grayson entered the room, his heavy footsteps breaking the fragile silence. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his tone clipped. "A word, if you please." Poirot rose with his characteristic grace, dabbing his moustache with a napkin before following the inspector to the drawing room. Hastings trailed behind, uninvited but determined to remain at Poirot's side. "Well?" Grayson demanded once the door was closed. "Have you made any progress? Or are we still chasing shadows?" Poirot's eyes twinkled with mild amusement. "Shadows, Inspector, are often cast by something substantial. I have observed much, and the picture begins to take shape. But tell me, what news do you bring?" Grayson scowled, clearly irritated by Poirot's enigmatic calm. "The coroner's report confirms Sir Reginald was poisoned with cyanide, administered in his evening brandy. The glass was wiped clean, no fingerprints. The bottle, however, was found in the study, and it's being tested for traces of the poison." "Bien," Poirot said, nodding. "And the alibis?" Grayson consulted his notebook. "Lady Beatrice claims she retired to her room at 10 o'clock and heard nothing. Lionel says he was in the billiard room with Dr. Vance until 10:30, then went to bed. Vance confirms this. Miss Wentworth says she was reading in her room after putting the children to bed at 9. The curate, Ridley, was in the library until 11, preparing his sermon. Mrs. Carver was in the servants' quarters, overseeing the staff, until after midnight." "And the servants?" Poirot asked. "Questioned thoroughly. None had access to the study after dinner, and they've no apparent motive. Sir Reginald was a fair employer, by all accounts." Poirot stroked his moustache thoughtfully. "And yet someone entered that study undetected, administered the poison, and left no trace. A remarkable feat, n'est-ce pas?" Grayson grunted. "Too remarkable. I'm inclined to believe it was someone close to him, someone who knew his habits." "Précisément," Poirot agreed. "The intimacy of the crime is undeniable. But the motive, Inspector, that is the key. And motives, they are often hidden in the heart." Hastings, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Surely, Poirot, the sapphire brooch points to Miss Wentworth. She had access to the study, and there's talk of her closeness with Sir Reginald." Poirot raised a hand, silencing his friend. "Mon cher Hastings, you leap too quickly to conclusions. The brooch is a distraction, a clumsy attempt to cast blame. No, the truth lies elsewhere, in the lies that have begun to unravel." Grayson frowned. "What lies?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Let us return to the dining room, messieurs. I have a little experiment to conduct."
Beatrice's teacup clattered against its saucer. Lionel's jaw tightened, and Clara's face paled further. Ridley's nervous fidgeting ceased abruptly, and Dr. Vance's drumming fingers stilled. Only Mrs. Carver remained impassive, her eyes narrowing slightly. Poirot continued, undeterred. "I have observed you all closely, and I have noted certain inconsistencies. For instance, the matter of the sapphire brooch found so conveniently in Mademoiselle Wentworth's room. Too convenient, perhaps. And then there is the question of time. Sir Reginald was last seen alive at 10:30, according to the butler's testimony. Yet the alibis provided are curiously vague, are they not?" He turned to Lionel. "Monsieur Ashford, you claim you were with Dr. Vance until 10:30. Yet the billiard room is but a short walk from the study. A man could slip away unnoticed for a few moments." Lionel's face reddened. "Are you accusing me, sir? I loved my father." "Love," Poirot mused. Can coexist with resentment, no? The inheritance of Blackthorn Manor is a powerful motive. Lady Beatrice interjected sharply. How dare you? Lionel would never harm his father. He stands to gain nothing. The estate is heavily entailed. Poirot inclined his head. Perhaps. But motives are not always financial. There are secrets here, secrets of the heart, and secrets they have a way of surfacing. He turned to Clara, his tone softening. Mademoiselle Wentworth, you have been most quiet. Yet I sense a burden upon you. Will you not share it? Clara's lips trembled, and her eyes filled with tears. I cannot speak of it, she whispered. It is too dreadful. Poirot's gaze was gentle but unrelenting. The truth, mademoiselle, is the only path to justice. Speak, I implore you. The room held its breath. Clara's hands twisted in her lap, and then, in a voice barely audible, she said, Sir Reginald, he made advances towards me. I rebuffed him, but he was persistent. I feared for my position, but I swear I did not harm him. A stunned silence followed. Lady Beatrice's face hardened, and Lionel's fists clenched. Dr. Vance leaned forward, his expression unreadable, while Ridley murmured a prayer under his breath. Poirot nodded as if unsurprised. Merci, mademoiselle. Your honesty is a step toward the light. But there is more, is there not? Someone else knew of this indiscretion. Someone who used it to their advantage. Mrs. Carver spoke for the first time, her voice cold and precise. This is nonsense, Monsieur Poirot. You're stirring up trouble with no proof. Poirot smiled faintly. Proof, Madame Carver, is in the details. For instance, the cyanide. It is not a common household item, yet it was readily available. And the brandy glass, wiped clean. Composure faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered. You're grasping at straws, sir. Am I? Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet triumph. Then let us consider another detail. The study window was found slightly ajar, yet no one mentioned opening it. A small thing, perhaps, but significant. The murderer needed to dispel the fumes of the cyanide, did they not? The room grew deathly still. Poirot's words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Hastings glanced at his friend, marveling at the precision of his deductions. Grayson, too, seemed to sense the shift in the atmosphere, his hand resting on his notebook as if preparing to pounce. Poirot stood, his small stature somehow commanding the room. The lies, they multiply, mes amis, but Hercule Poirot sees through them. Tomorrow we shall gather again, and I shall lay bare the truth. Until then, I advise you all to reflect upon your secrets, for they will not remain hidden. As Poirot exited the room, followed closely by Hastings and Grayson, the suspects exchanged uneasy glances. The net was tightening, and the murderer, whoever they were, could feel the weight of Poirot's scrutiny bearing down upon them. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The afternoon light slanted through the tall windows of Blackthorn Manor's library, painting the room in hues of gold and amber. The air was heavy with the scent of old leather and polished wood, but no amount of grandeur could dispel the oppressive atmosphere that clung to the house. Hercule Poirot stood before a towering bookshelf, his gloved fingers delicately tracing the spine of a volume of Shakespeare. Though his mind was far from the bard's words, his little grey cells were at work, piecing together the mosaic of lies, half-truths, and hidden passions that had surfaced in the wake of Sir Reginald Ashford's murder. Captain Hastings sat in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, his notebook open on his lap, though his pen had scarcely touched the page. He watched Poirot with a mixture of admiration and frustration, knowing his friend was close to a breakthrough, yet unable to predict its shape. The other occupants of the manor, Lady Beatrice, Lionel, Clara, Mr. Ridley, Mrs. Carver, and Dr. Vance had been asked to remain in their rooms until Poirot summoned them. The detective had insisted on privacy for what he called a moment of reflection, though Hastings suspected it was more a tactical pause to let the suspects stew in their unease. The revelations of the morning had shaken the household. Clara Wentworth's admission of Sir Reginald's unwanted advances had cast a new light on the dynamics of Blackthorn Manor, and Poirot had noted the reactions of each suspect with keen interest. Lady Beatrice's icy fury, Lionel's clenched fists, Dr. Vance's gun
Weaving. But one thread, he sensed, was about to snap. A soft knock at the library door interrupted his thoughts. Hastings rose to answer it, but Poirot waved him back with a gentle gesture. "Entrez!" Poirot called, his voice calm but authoritative. The door opened to reveal Clara Wentworth, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She hesitated on the threshold, clutching a handkerchief as if it were a lifeline.
"Monsieur Poirot,"
she said, her voice trembling.
"I must speak with you, alone, if you please."
Poirot's mustache twitched slightly, a sign of his curiosity. "Mademoiselle, you are most welcome. But I must insist that Captain Hastings remain. He is my confidant, and his presence ensures that all is recorded with accuracy. Please, sit." Clara glanced at Hastings, her expression wavering, but she nodded and took a seat on the edge of a velvet-upholstered chair. Her hands twisted the handkerchief into knots, and her breath came in shallow, uneven bursts. Poirot sat opposite her, his posture immaculate, his eyes gentle yet piercing. "You have something to confess, mademoiselle? Speak freely. Hercule Poirot listens, and he does not judge." Clara's lips parted, but no sound came at first. She swallowed hard, then began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I lied this morning. Not about Sir Reginald's advances. They were true, and I was terrified of him. But there's more. I saw something that night. Something I didn't dare tell anyone." Poirot leaned forward slightly, his hands folded neatly in his lap. "Continue, mademoiselle. What did you see?" Clara's eyes darted to the door, as if expecting someone to burst in. "It was after 10 o'clock. I couldn't sleep. Not after Sir Reginald tried to kiss me in the corridor earlier that evening. I went to the nursery to check on the children, to calm my nerves. On my way back, I passed the study. The door was ajar, and I heard voices, low, angry voices." Hastings leaned forward, his pen poised. "Whose voices, Miss Wentworth?" Clara shook her head, her voice breaking. "I couldn't tell. One was Sir Reginald's, I'm sure of it. He had that deep, commanding tone." "Has changed." Clara's voice dropped to a whisper.
"Last night someone slipped a note under my door. It said, 'Keep silent, or you be next.' I'm terrified, Monsieur Poirot. I think the murderer knows I heard something." Hastings gasped, but Poirot remained composed, though his eyes narrowed. "This note, mademoiselle, Do you have it? Clara reached into her pocket and produced a folded piece of paper. Poirot took it carefully, unfolding it with gloved fingers. The note was written in a hurried, uneven hand. Keep silent or you'll be next. The paper was plain, the ink black, offering no immediate clues. Poirot placed it in his pocket, his face unreadable. Merci, mademoiselle, he said. You have shown great courage. Return to your room and speak of this to no one. Hercule Poirot will ensure your safety. Clara nodded, her shoulders sagging with relief, and left the room. As the door closed, Hastings turned to Poirot, his voice urgent. Good heavens, Poirot! This changes everything! Someone's threatening her to keep quiet. The murderer must be getting desperate. Poirot nodded, his expression grave. Oui, mon ami. The murderer is indeed desperate, and this note is a mistake, a crack in their carefully constructed facade. But we must proceed with care. The voices in the study, the crash of the glass, the threat, they point to a motive rooted in something Sir Reginald possessed, something worth killing for. Hastings frowned. But what? The estate? The sapphire brooch? Poirot shook his head. No, Hastings. The brooch is a distraction, as I have said, and the estate, while valuable, is not the heart of this matter. No, it is something more personal, more intimate. We must look to the relationships in this house, the resentments, the betrayals. He rose and began to pace, his hands clasped behind his back. Consider, Hastings, the alibis. Lionel and Dr. Vance claim they were together, yet a moment's absence could go unnoticed. Lady Beatrice retired early, but her room is near the study, close enough to hear or to act. Mr. Ridley was in the library, a solitary alibi, and Mrs. Carver so efficient, so observant, her knowledge of the house is unmatched. Any of them could have slipped into the study, administered the cyanide, and left the window ajar to dispel the fumes. Hastings rubbed his temples. But the voices Clara heard, Sir Reginald arguing with someone. That suggests a confrontation, not a stealthy poisoning. Precisement, Poirot said, stopping mid-stride. The argument was the prelude to the crime. The murderer acted in a moment of passion, perhaps, but planned the method with care. Hidden beneath the rose bushes near the study window. It's being tested, but I'd wager it contained the cyanide. Poirot's eyes lit up. Magnifique, Inspector! This vial! It confirms the method of entry and escape. The murderer entered through the window, perhaps, or used it to dispose of evidence. And the rose bushes, did they show signs of disturbance? Grayson nodded. Some broken stems, a few petals scattered. Someone was there all right. Poirot clapped his hands together. Bon. The pieces they fall into place. Tonight, Inspector, we shall gather everyone in the drawing room. I have a little plan to flush out our murderer, but first, I must examine this vial, and I must speak with Mrs. Carver. Her knowledge of the household routines is illuminating. As Grayson left to fetch the housekeeper, Hastings leaned closer. Poirot, you're not saying Mrs. Carver's the murderer, are you? She's so composed? Poirot smiled faintly. Compose, mon ami, can be a mask. But no, I do not yet accuse. I observe, I question, and I wait. The truth, it will reveal itself in the contradictions. When Mrs. Carver entered, her posture was as rigid as ever, her dark eyes meeting Poirot's without flinching. You wish to see me, Monsieur Poirot? Oui, madame, Poirot said, his tone polite but probing. I wish to discuss the evening of Sir Reginald's death. You were in the servants' quarters, overseeing the staff, oui? Yes, she replied, her voice steady. "I was ensuring everything was in order for the morning." "And yet," Poirot said, tilting his head, "you did not hear the crash of a glass or voices raised in anger from the study." Mrs. Carver's lips tightened. "The servants' quarters are at the far end of the house. I heard nothing." Poirot nodded, as if satisfied, but his eyes never left her face. "And the study window? Do you recall if it was open earlier that evening?" "I wouldn't know," she said quickly. "I had no reason to check." "Merci, madame," Poirot said, dismissing her with a wave. As she left, he turned to Hastings, his expression thoughtful. "She knows more than she says, Hastings, but it is not yet time to press her. Tonight, we shall set the stage for the final act." The library grew quiet once more, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock. Poirot stood motionless, his mind a whirlwind of deductions, as the shadows lengthened and the hour of confrontation drew near. Chapter 9. The Trap. The drawing-room of Blackthorn Manor was bathed in the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. Their eyes, sharp and unyielding, surveyed the assembled company with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. Captain Hastings sat to one side, his notebook discreetly tucked away, though his keen gaze darted between the suspects, searching for any telltale sign of guilt. Inspector Grayson stood near the door, his arms crossed, his expression one of barely concealed impatience. The suspects, Lady Beatrice Ashford, Lionel Ashford, Clara Wentworth, Mr. Thomas Ridley, Mrs. Evelyn Carver, and Dr. Malcolm Vance, sat in a semicircle of high-backed chairs, their faces a study in varied emotions: fear, defiance, resignation, and wariness. Poirot had orchestrated this gathering with meticulous care, as if setting a stage for a play in which the final act would reveal the truth. The discovery of the vial beneath the rosebushes, Clara's confession about the voices in the study, and the threatening note slipped under her door had all sharpened his focus. The murderer, he knew, was growing desperate, and desperation bred mistakes. Tonight, Poirot intended to exploit that vulnerability. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and resonant, "we are gathered here to confront the truth about the murder of Sir Reginald Ashford, a man of wealth and influence, struck down in his own study by a poison most cruel, cyanide, administered in his brandy. The question is not only who committed this act, but why. And tonight, Hercule Poirot will lay bare the answer." A murmur rippled through the room. Lady Beatrice's lips tightened, her gloved hands gripping the arms of her chair. Lionel shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flickering towards Dr. Vance, who sat with a studied air of detachment. Clara clutched her handkerchief, her face pale but resolute after her earlier confession. Ridley's fingers toyed nervously with his clerical collar, while Mrs. Carver's expression remained as unreadable as stone. Poirot paced slowly before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. "Let us begin with the facts. Sir Reginald was last seen alive at 10:30, according to the butler, who brought him his brandy. By 11, he was dead. The glass was wiped clean of fingerprints, the bottle laced with cyanide. The study window was ajar, and a vial, likely containing the poison, was found hidden beneath the rosebushes outside. These are not coincidences, mes amis. They are the work of a mind both cunning and desperate." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But there is more. Mademoiselle Wentworth has bravely shared that she overheard voices in the study that night, an argument, followed by the crash of a glass. Sir Reginald said, 'You'll not have it, not while I live.' A significant statement, no? It suggests a motive rooted in possession, something the murderer desired, something Sir Reginald refused to yield." Lady Beatrice fragments. "My husband was a generous man. with no enemies in this house. Poirot turned to her, his eyes glinting. Generous, madame. Perhaps, but generosity does not preclude secrets, and secrets, they are the lifeblood of this crime. Let us examine the alibis, shall we? He gestured to Lionel. Monsieur Ashford, you claim you were with Dr. Vance in the billiard room until 10:30. Dr. Vance confirms this, yet the billiard room is but a short walk from the study. A brief absence would go unnoticed, oui? Lionel's face flushed with anger. I've told you! I didn't leave the room! Malcolm, tell him! Dr. Vance nodded, his voice calm. It's true, Monsieur Poirot. We were together the entire time. Poirot's moustache twitched. And yet, Doctor, your composure is most remarkable. A man of medicine, familiar with poisons, perhaps? Cyanide is not easily obtained, but a physician might know where to procure it. Vance's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. Poirot turned to Clara. Mademoiselle Wentworth, your testimony has been most illuminating. The voices you heard, the threat you received, these point to a murderer who fears exposure. But why threaten you unless they believe you know more than you have said? Clara's voice trembled. I've told you everything, Monsieur Poirot. I swear it. Poirot nodded, his expression softening. I believe you, mademoiselle, but the murderer does not, and that is their mistake. He turned to Ridley, who flinched under his gaze. Monsieur Ridley, you were in the library, preparing your sermon, a solitary task with no one to confirm your whereabouts, and yet you seem most anxious. Is there something you wish to share? Ridley's voice was barely audible. I have nothing to hide, Monsieur Poirot. I was praying for guidance. Guidance, Poirot mused, or forgiveness? Ridley paled, but before he could respond, Poirot turned to Mrs. Carver. And you, madame, the ever-efficient housekeeper, you claim to have been in the servants' quarters, yet your knowledge of this house, its routines, its secrets, is unparalleled. The study window, left ajar. Did you not notice it earlier that evening? Mrs. Carver's eyes flashed with defiance. I've told you I had no reason to check the study. My duties keep me elsewhere. Poirot nodded, as if conceding the point, but his tone carried a subtle edge. And yet, madame, you are always watching, always observing. It is curious, is it not, that you heard nothing, saw nothing. Object. Poirot took it carefully, holding it up to the light. This phial, found beneath the rose bushes, likely contained the cyanide. But what is most interesting is not the vial itself, but where it was found. The rose bushes are directly beneath the study window, yet the ground was disturbed, broken stems, scattered petals. Someone was there, perhaps in haste, disposing of evidence. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. But here is the trap, mes amis. I propose that the murderer in their haste left another clue, a clue that will betray them. Inspector, have you examined the vial for fingerprints? Grayson nodded. We have, Monsieur Poirot. There are none. It's been wiped clean, just like the brandy glass. Poirot's eyes gleamed with triumph. Précisément. And this is the murderer's error. To wipe the vial clean suggests guilt, but to hide it so poorly suggests panic. I put it to you, mes amis, that the murderer is among us, and they are growing careless. A stifled gasp escaped Clara. Lionel's fists clenched. Lady Beatrice's composure wavered, her hand rising to her throat. Dr. Vance's expression remained impassive, but his fingers twitched slightly. Ridley's lips moved in silent prayer, and Mrs. Carver's gaze hardened, as if bracing for a blow. Poirot continued, his voice rising with dramatic flair. "Tonight, I shall reveal one final detail, a detail that will point to the truth, but I warn you, the murderer will not escape Hercule Poirot. I have seen the contradictions, the lies, the hidden motives, and before this night is over, I shall name the one who killed Sir Reginald Ashford." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the room. Then, with a sudden shift in tone, he said, "But for now, mes amis, we shall dine. The mind, it requires sustenance to function at its peak. Inspector, please ensure that everyone remains in the manor. We reconvene at 9 o'clock. As the suspects rose, their movements stiff and uncertain, Poirot exchanged a glance with Hastings. "What was that about, Poirot?" Hastings whispered as the others filed out. "You didn't reveal anything new." Poirot smiled, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Au contraire, mon ami, I have set the trap. The murderer now knows that I am close to the truth. They will act, perhaps to flee, perhaps to silence another. And when they do, we shall be ready." Grayson approached, his brow furrowed. "I hope you know what you're doing, Poirot. This lot's on edge." Of Blackthorn Manor was cloaked in a heavy silence, broken only by the faint crackle of the fire and the distant ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. The chandeliers cast a flickering glow over the assembled company, their faces etched with anticipation and dread. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small, immaculate figure radiating an almost theatrical authority. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, moved from one suspect to another, each glance a silent accusation that seemed to pierce the very soul. Captain Hastings sat to the side, his hands clasped tightly, his heart pounding with the certainty that Poirot was about to unveil the truth. Inspector Grayson stood by the door, his notebook at the ready, his expression a mixture of skepticism and grudging respect. The suspects, Lady Beatrice Ashford, Lionel Ashford, Clara Wentworth, Mr. Thomas Ridley, Mrs. Evelyn Carver, and Dr. Malcolm Vance, sat in their chairs, their postures rigid, as if bracing for a storm. Poirot had spent the hours since dinner in quiet contemplation, reviewing every detail, every contradiction, every fleeting expression that had betrayed the secrets of Blackthorn Manor. The threatening note to Clara, the vial beneath the rose bushes, the voices overheard in the study, the wiped brandy glass, all were pieces of a puzzle that had finally come together in his mind. Now it was time to lay bare the truth. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice resonant and deliberate, "we have reached the moment of truth. The murder of Sir Reginald Ashford was no act of impulse, no random cruelty. It was a crime of calculation, born of a motive so deep, so personal, that it drove one among you to commit the ultimate sin. Tonight, Hercule Poirot will reveal the murderer." A collective intake of breath filled the room. Lady Beatrice's eyes narrowed, her lips a thin line. Lionel's hands clenched into fists, his jaw tight. Clara's handkerchief was a crumpled mass in her lap, her face pale with fear. Ridley's fingers trembled on his prayer book, while Dr. Vance's calm facade showed the faintest crack, a slight tightening around his eyes. Mrs. Carver alone remained impassive, her gaze fixed on Poirot with an intensity that bordered on defiance. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Let us reconstruct the night of the murder. Sir Reginald was in his study, enjoying his evening brandy, a ritual known to all in this house. At 10:30, the butler delivered the brandy and left. By 11, Sir Reginald was dead, poisoned by cyanide administered in that very brandy. The glass was wiped clean, the bottle contaminated, the study window left ajar to dispel the fumes. And beneath the rose bushes outside, a vial, likely the vessel.
And Sir Reginald's words, "You'll not have it, not while I live." These words, mes amis, are the key. They point to a motive rooted in possession, not of wealth, not of jewels, but of power, of control, of something Sir Reginald held dear and refused to relinquish. Poirot turned to the group, his eyes gleaming. Let us consider the suspects. Lady Beatrice, the grieving widow, whose composure masks a heart wounded by her husband's indiscretions. Monsieur Lionel, the heir, whose resentment of his father's control over the estate simmered beneath his loyalty. Mademoiselle Wentworth, the governess, who suffered Sir Reginald's unwanted advances and feared for her position. Monsieur Ridley, the curate, whose piety hides a nervous disposition. Dr. Vance, the physician, with access to poisons and a coolness under pressure. And Madame Carver, the housekeeper, whose knowledge of this house is matched only by her silence. A murmur of protest rose, but Poirot raised a hand, silencing it. Patience, mes amis. The truth requires method. Let us examine the clues. The sapphire brooch found in Mademoiselle Wentworth's room was a clumsy attempt to cast suspicion, a red herring, as the English say. The threatening note slipped under her door, "Keep silent or you'll be next," was a desperate act to silence her testimony, and the vial, wiped clean of fingerprints, hidden beneath the rose bushes, points to a murderer who planned meticulously but faltered in execution. He turned to Clara, his tone gentle. "Mademoiselle, your courage in revealing the voices you heard has been most valuable, but the murderer's mistake was not in threatening you. It was in believing you knew more than you did. The argument you overheard was not about you, but about something far more dangerous." Poirot's gaze shifted to Dr. Vance, whose fingers twitched almost imperceptibly. "Doctor, you have maintained that you were with Monsieur Lionel in the billiard room until 10:30. Yet the billiard room is near the study, and a brief absence would go unnoticed. You are a man of science, familiar with cyanide and its effects. Curious, is it not, that the poison was administered so precisely?" Vance's voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. "I've told you, Monsieur Poirot, I was with Lionel. I had no reason to harm Sir Reginald." Poirot nodded, as if conceding the point, then turned to Mrs. Carver. "Madame, your alibi is equally solitary. The servants' quarters are far from the study, yet you are the eyes and ears of this house. You claim to have heard nothing, seen nothing, yet I suspect you know more than you have admitted." Mrs. Carver. Confrontation. Sir Reginald was arguing with someone he knew well, someone who had access to his brandy, someone who could move through this house undetected. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room. "The murderer is Dr. Malcolm Vance." A gasp erupted from the group. Vance shot to his feet, his face pale but defiant. "This is preposterous! You have no proof?" Poirot raised a hand, his voice calm but unyielding. "Sit, doctor. Allow me to explain. The motive, it was not money nor love, but reputation. Sir Reginald held a secret over you, a secret that threatened your career, your standing in society. Years ago, you made a grave error in your practice, a misdiagnosis that cost a life. Sir Reginald knew of this and used it to bind you to him, to ensure your loyalty. But you grew tired of his control, did you not? When he refused to release you, you saw no other way. Vance's face contorted, but he remained silent. Poirot continued, his voice rising with conviction. The cyanide was obtained through your medical connections, a small quantity untraceable. You slipped into the study during a moment when Lionel was distracted, perhaps fetching a drink. You argued with Sir Reginald, and in that moment of rage, you poisoned his brandy. The crash Clara heard was not the glass. It was a book, knocked from the desk in your struggle. You wiped the glass clean, opened the window to dispel the fumes, and hid the vial beneath the rose bushes, believing it safe. Lionel's voice broke the silence. Malcolm, is this true? Vance's composure cracked, his voice trembling. It's a lie! I cared for Sir Reginald. He was my friend. Poirot's eyes softened, but his tone was relentless. A friend who held you in chains, Doctor. The note to Mademoiselle Wentworth was your final mistake. You feared she had recognized your voice, and in your panic, you sought to silence her. But Hercule Poirot sees all, and the truth cannot be hidden. Vance sank back into his chair, his head in his hands. A sob escaped Clara, and Lady Beatrice's face crumpled, though whether from grief or relief, Hastings could not tell. Ridley murmured a prayer, and Mrs. Carver's eyes gleamed with something like triumph. Inspector Grayson stepped forward, his voice gruff. Dr. Vance, you'll come with me. We'll sort this out of the station. As Vance was led away, his shoulders slumped, Poirot turned to the others. The truth. It is painful, but it is just. Sir Reginald's death was a tragedy, but it was born of human weakness. Let us learn from it, mes amis, and seek the light. The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation settling over them like dust. Poirot adjusted his cuffs, his expression serene, and gestured for Hastings to follow him out. Chapter 11.
Heavy clouds that had loomed over the estate for days had parted, allowing pale sunlight to filter through the tall windows, casting a serene glow over the polished floors and ornate furnishings. Yet beneath this veneer of tranquility, the weight of the previous night's events lingered, like the faint echo of a storm. Hercule Poirot sat in the library, a steaming cup of tisane before him, his posture as impeccable as ever. His small, gloved hands rested lightly on the arms of the chair, and his eyes, though bright, carried a contemplative depth. Captain Hastings, seated across from him, stirred his tea absently, his mind still reeling from the confrontation that had unmasked Dr. Malcolm Vance as Sir Reginald Ashford's murderer. The other occupants of the manor, Lady Beatrice, Lionel, Clara, Mr. Ridley and Mrs. Carver, had retreated to their respective corners of the house, grappling with the aftermath of the truth. Inspector Grayson had departed with Vance in custody, the doctor's once confident demeanor reduced to a hollow silence as it was led away. The manor, now free of the murderer's presence, felt strangely empty, as if the resolution of the crime had left a void that no one quite knew how to fill. Hastings glanced at Poirot, who seemed lost in thought, his fingers tapping lightly against the porcelain cup. Poirot, Hastings ventured, breaking the silence. I must say, you were brilliant last night. The way you pieced it all together, the vial, the note, the voices in the study, it was like watching a maestro conduct an orchestra. But how did you know it was Vance? Poirot's moustache twitched in a faint smile. Mon cher Hastings, it is always the same. The truth, it reveals itself in the contradictions, in the small details that others overlook. Dr. Vance, he was too perfect in his composure, too quick to confirm Monsieur Lionel's alibi. And yet his eyes, they betrayed a fear, a knowledge that he was not as safe as he believed. Hastings leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. But the motive, Sir Reginald holding a secret over him, how did you uncover that?
Poirot sipped his tisane, his movements deliberate. It was a matter of psychology, Hastings. Sir Reginald was a man of power, a man who collected secrets as others collect fine art. Dr. Vance, a physician, would be vulnerable to such leverage. The cyanide, so precise in its use, pointed to someone with medical knowledge. And the note to Mademoiselle Wentworth, it was not the act of a cold strategist, but of a man in panic, fearing exposure. From there, the pieces fell into place. Hastings shook his head, marveling. You make it sound so simple, Poirot. But what about the others? Lady Beatrice, Lionel, Mrs. Carver, they all had their secrets too.
Father's control, yet loyal to the family name. Mademoiselle Wentworth, caught in a web of fear and suspicion. Monsieur Ridley, hiding his own doubts beneath his piety. And Madame Carver, whose silence was not innocence, but a shield for her own knowledge. They are all human, Hastings, and humans are complex. He set his cup down, his expression growing solemn. The crime, it is not merely the act of killing. It is the ripple that spreads, touching every life. Sir Reginald's death was a tragedy, but so too is the pain it has caused those left behind. This is why Hercule Poirot seeks the truth, not for glory, but for justice, for order. Hastings nodded, though his brow furrowed. And Clara, she was so frightened, poor girl. Will she be safe now? Poirot's gaze softened. Mademoiselle Wentworth has shown great courage. The threat is gone, and she will find her strength. I have spoken with Lady Beatrice, who has agreed to keep her on as governess. The manor will heal in time. A soft knock at the library door interrupted their conversation. Lady Beatrice entered, a face pale but composed, a black morning dress a stark contrast to the morning light. Monsieur Poirot, she said, a voice steady but tinged with emotion. I wished to thank you. Your work has brought clarity to this terrible affair, though the truth is painful. Poirot rose, bowing slightly. Madame, it is my duty to uncover the truth, however painful. Sir Reginald's death was a wound, but now, perhaps, the healing may begin. Lady Beatrice's lips trembled, but she held her composure. You have seen into the heart of this house, Monsieur Poirot. I confess, I suspected Lionel at times, or even Clara. I was blind to Malcolm's deceit. How did you see what we could not? Poirot's eyes twinkled with a hint of pride. It is the method, madame. The little grey cells. They observe, they analyze, they connect. The truth is always there, hidden in the details, the white glass, the open window, the vial in the rose bushes. One must only look with clarity. Lady Beatrice nodded, their expression softening. You are a remarkable man, Monsieur Poirot. If ever you are in need of a place to rest, Blackthorn Manor will welcome you. Merci, madame, Poirot said, inclining his head. But for now, my work here is done. I return to London, where other puzzles await. As Lady Beatrice left, Hastings turned to Poirot, a question lingering in his mind. Poirot, do you ever tire of it? The lies, the secrets, the darkness in people's hearts. Poirot's expression grew thoughtful, his gaze distant. Sometimes, Blackthorn Manor to its future and return to the world beyond. As they stepped out into the crisp morning air, the manor looming behind them, Hastings felt a strange mixture of relief and melancholy. The case was solved, the murderer unmasked, but the echoes of the tragedy would linger. Poirot, however, walked with his usual brisk stride, his head held high, already turning his thoughts to the next challenge. The carriage rolled away, carrying them toward the station, and Blackthorn Manor faded into the distance its secrets laid bare by the brilliance of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 12. Shadows of Truth. The train to London rattled along the tracks, its rhythmic clatter a stark contrast to the oppressive silence that had enveloped Blackthorn Manor. Hercule Poirot sat by the window, his gloved hands folded neatly in his lap, his eyes fixed on the passing countryside, though his mind was far from the rolling hills and hedgerows. Captain Hastings, seated opposite, fidgeted with his newspaper, unable to focus on the headlines. The resolution of Sir Reginald Ashford's murder had left him both satisfied and unsettled, as if some lingering question remained unanswered. The morning's departure from the manor had been swift, with Poirot insisting on an early train to avoid the inevitable flurry of gratitude and farewells. Lady Beatrice had pressed a note of thanks into his hand, her eyes brimming with a mixture of relief and sorrow. Lionel had offered a curt nod, his youthful defiance softened by the weight of the truth. Clara Wentworth, still pale but resolute, had managed a shy smile, her gratitude unspoken but evident. Mr. Ridley had murmured a blessing, and Mrs. Carver, ever enigmatic, had watched their departure with an unreadable expression. Yet, as the manor faded into the distance, Hastings could not shake the feeling that something had been left unresolved. "Poirot," Hastings ventured, folding his newspaper, "you're awfully quiet. Are you quite satisfied with the outcome? Vance's confession, or rather his lack of denial, seemed to seal the case, but I can't help wondering if we missed something." Poirot turned from the window, his moustache twitching in a faint smile. "Mon cher Hastings, you are perceptive in your unease. The case, it is solved, oui. Dr. Vance is the murderer, and the evidence is irrefutable. The cyanide, the vial, the note to Mademoiselle Wentworth all point to his guilt. And yet, the mind of Hercule Poirot is never entirely at rest until every shadow is dispelled." Hastings frowned, leaning forward. "Shadows? What do you mean, Poirot? You named Vance, and he didn't deny it. Surely that's the end of it." Poirot's eyes gleamed with a familiar intensity. "The truth, Hastings, is like a diamond. It has many facets. Dr. Vance killed Sir Reginald." Mind. Hastings' brow furrowed. "Complicity? You think someone else was involved?" Poirot raised a hand, his gesture both calming and enigmatic. "Not involved in the act, perhaps, but in the knowledge. Consider, Hastings, the efficiency of the crime, the wiped glass, the hidden vial, the open window. These are the marks of a plan. Yet the note to Mademoiselle Wentworth was a mistake, a sign of panic. Why would a man so careful make such an error unless he felt threatened by another's knowledge?" Hastings's eyes widened. "You mean someone else knew what Vance was planning?" Poirot nodded slowly. "It is possible, mon ami. The voices Mademoiselle Wentworth heard in the study, Sir Reginald, and another. We assumed it was Vance, and indeed it was. But what if another heard that argument or knew of its cause? What if someone in Blackthorn Manor allowed the crime to unfold, perhaps not by action, but by silence?" Hastings leaned back, his mind racing. "Good heavens, Poirot, that's a chilling thought. But who? Lady Beatrice? Lionel? Mrs. Carver?" Poirot's expression grew distant, his fingers tapping lightly against the armrest. "Let us consider Madame Carver, the housekeeper, so composed, so observant, yet claiming to have heard nothing, seen nothing. Her alibi is solitary, her knowledge of the house unmatched. She is a woman who sees all, yet speaks little. Is it not possible that she knew of Dr. Vance's discontent, perhaps even of his plan, and chose to remain silent?" Hastings shook his head, incredulous. "But why? What motive would she have to let Sir Reginald die?" Poirot's gaze returned to the window, his voice soft but piercing. Motive, Hastings, is not always a matter of gain. Sometimes it is a matter of justice. Sir Reginald was a man of power, but also of cruelty. His advances toward Mademoiselle Wentworth, his control over Dr. Vance, his strained relations with his family, these were not secrets to a housekeeper as astute as Madame Carver. Perhaps she saw in his death a form of retribution, a way to free the household from his tyranny. Hastings's jaw dropped. You're saying she let it happen? That's monstrous in its own way. Poirot's smile was tinged with melancholy. Not monstrous, Hastings, but human. The heart, it is complex, capable of both compassion and calculation. Madame Carver may have believed that by doing nothing she was protecting others, Clara, Lionel, even herself. But this, it is mere speculation. Without evidence, it remains a shadow. The train lurched slightly, and Hastings gripped the edge of his seat. Then why not confront her? If you suspect she knew, why let her go Hastings, the detective must accept that not all truths can be brought to light. Hastings sighed, his unease only partially assuaged. It doesn't sit right with me, Poirot. The idea that someone else might have known and done nothing. It's unsettling. Poirot nodded, his expression softening. It is the burden of our work, Hastings. We seek the truth, but we cannot always erase the shadows it casts. Yet, in solving this crime, we have brought clarity to Blackthorn Manor. The living may now find peace, even if it is imperfect. The train whistle sounded, signaling their approach to London. Poirot adjusted his hat, his movements precise as always. Come, Hastings, the city awaits, and with it, new puzzles. Let us leave the shadows of Blackthorn Manor behind. As the train pulled into the station, Hastings gathered his belongings, his mind still turning over Poirot's words. The case was closed, the murderer apprehended, but the lingering question of Mrs. Carver's silence gnawed at him. He glanced at Poirot, whose serene expression betrayed no hint of doubt. Whatever shadows remained, Hercule Poirot had made his peace with them, and Hastings knew better than to question the wisdom of his friend's little grey cells. They stepped onto the platform, the bustle of London enveloping them, and Hastings felt the weight of the case begin to lift. The truth had been served, however imperfectly, and for now, that was enough. Chapter 13. The Unseen Motives. The London skyline loomed into view as the train slowed its approach to Victoria Station, the familiar hustle of the city a stark contrast to the cloistered tension of Blackthorn Manor. Hercule Poirot sat with his usual poise, his gloved hands resting on the silver handle of his cane, his eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond the window. Captain Hastings, seated across from him, had abandoned his newspaper entirely, his thoughts still entangled in the shadows Poirot had alluded to during their journey. The resolution of Sir Reginald Ashford's murder had brought justice, yet the lingering suspicion of Mrs. Carver's complicity gnawed at him, like a melody unresolved. Poirot, Hastings said, his voice low to avoid the ears of nearby passengers. I can't stop thinking about what you said about Mrs. Carver. If she knew something and did nothing, isn't that a crime in itself? Surely there's a way to pursue it. Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint sign of amusement or perhaps indulgence. Mon cher Hastings, you are like the hound who cannot let go of the bone. Justice, it is not always so simple as catching every wrongdoer. Madame Carver's silence, if indeed she was silent, is a matter of the heart, not of the law. Without evidence, without a confession or a witness, there is nothing to pursue. And yet, armrest. But it feels wrong to let it lie. She's still at Blackthorn Manor, carrying on as if nothing happened. What if she's dangerous? Poirot's eyes gleamed with a quiet intensity. Dangerous, perhaps, but not in the way you fear. Madame Carver is not a murderer, Hastings. Her crime, if there is one of omission, a choice to let events unfold. And yet consider her position. A housekeeper, dependent on the goodwill of her employers, privy to their secrets, yet powerless to act openly. If she knew of Dr. Vance's intentions, what could she have done? To speak would have risked her livelihood, her place in the world. Hastings' brow furrowed. "You're defending her?" No, Poirot said, raising a hand. "I do not defend, I understand. The detective, he must see all perspectives, even those of the silent. Madame Carver's motives, they are hidden. But they are not those of a killer. Her silence may have been her rebellion against Sir Reginald's tyranny, a small act of defiance in a life of servitude." The train jolted to a stop, and the compartment filled with the sounds of passengers gathering their belongings. Poirot rose, adjusting his hat with meticulous care. "Come, Hastings. Let us leave the shadows of Blackthorn Manor behind and embrace the clarity of London." As they stepped onto the platform, the bustle of the station enveloped them. Porters shouting, travellers hurrying, the air thick with coal smoke and anticipation. Hastings followed Poirot through the crowd, his mind still turning over the case. The image of Mrs. Carver's impassive face lingered, her dark eyes seeming to hold secrets that even Poirot's brilliance could not fully illuminate. They hailed a cab to Poirot's flat in Whitehaven Mansions, the familiar routine offering a semblance of normalcy. Inside, Poirot's impeccable home was a haven of order, every surface gleaming, every object in its precise place. As Hastings settled into an armchair, Poirot busied himself preparing a fresh pot of tisane, his movements as deliberate as his deductions. "Poirot," Hastings said, unable to let the matter rest, "what if we return to Blackthorn Manor? We could question Mrs. Carver again, perhaps catch her off guard." Poirot turned, a cup in hand, his expression one of gentle reproach. "Mon ami, you are persistent, but you must learn the art of letting go. The case, it is closed. Dr. Vance will face justice, and Blackthorn Manor will find its way. To return now would be to chase ghosts, and Hercule Poirot does not chase what cannot be caught." Hastings sighed, leaning back. "I suppose you're right, but it's maddening knowing there might be more to the story." Poirot's smile was tinged with,
"And Madame Carver with her secrets? We have resolved the crime, but the human heart, it remains a mystery." He handed Hastings a cup, the fragrant steam rising between them. "Consider, mon ami, the lesson of this case. Sir Reginald's death was not merely the act of a desperate man, but the culmination of years of control, of secrets held over others. Dr. Vance killed to free himself, but in doing so, he bound himself to a greater prison. And Madame Carver, if she knew, chose silence as her weapon. Both are acts of rebellion, but both come at a cost." Hastings sipped his tea, the warmth soothing his restless thoughts. "You see so much, Poirot. I sometimes wonder how you bear it, knowing so much about people's weaknesses." Poirot's eyes softened, and he sat across from Hastings, his posture relaxed yet dignified. "It is not a burden, Hastings, but a privilege. To understand the heart, to see its flaws and its strengths, is to understand life itself. The detective's role is not to judge, but to illuminate, to bring order where there is chaos. And in that order, there is hope." The room fell quiet, save for the faint ticking of a clock on the mantel. Hastings looked at his friend, marveling at the clarity of his vision, the balance of compassion and precision that defined him. The case of Blackthorn Manor had been a dark journey, but Poirot's light had guided them through. As the evening deepened, Poirot rose, his movements brisk. "Enough of reflection, Hastings. Tomorrow we shall dine at the Savoy. and you shall tell me of your latest golfing exploits. For now, let us rest, and let the world turn as it will." Hastings smiled, the weight of the case finally lifting. "You're right, Poirot. A good dinner and a bit of normalcy. That's just the ticket." As Poirot busied himself with the evening's correspondence, Hastings leaned back, the shadows of Blackthorn Manor fading into the warmth of the present. The truth had been served, the guilty punished, and the rest, as Poirot had said, was a matter of the heart. Chapter 14. The Final Echoes. The soft glow of gaslights illuminated the streets of London as Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings stepped out of their cab and into the familiar elegance of Whitehaven mansions. The evening air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of coal smoke and the distant hum of the city. Inside Poirot's impeccably ordered flat, the world seemed to regain its balance, a stark contrast to the tangled web of deceit they had unraveled at Blackthorn Manor. Yet, as Hastings hung his coat and settled into a plush armchair, the case lingered in his mind like the final notes of a haunting melody. Poirot, ever the picture of precision, busied himself arranging a tray of crystal decanters and glasses, his movements as deliberate as his deduction.
And a whiskey for Hastings, his eyes gleaming with a quiet satisfaction. "Hastings," Poirot said, handing him the glass, "you are still troubled, no? The case is closed, the murderer apprehended, and yet your brow is furrowed. What is it that gnaws at you?" Hastings took a sip, the whiskey warming his throat. "It's Mrs. Carver, Poirot. I know you said we can't pursue her without evidence, but the thought that she might have let Vance kill Sir Reginald, it's like a loose thread. I can't help but pull at it." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of both amusement and understanding. "Mon cher, you are like the terrier with the bone, always digging. But consider this. The truth, it is not always a single thread to be pulled. Sometimes it is a tapestry, woven from many strands, some of which remain forever out of reach. Madame Carver's silence, if indeed she was silent, is one such strand. We cannot prove it, and thus we must let it lie." Hastings leaned forward, his voice earnest. "But what if she acts again? What if her silence was more than just inaction? What if she's capable of something worse?" Poirot set his glass down, his expression growing serious. "You fear the shadow, Hastings, and it is a fear born of your good heart. But let me assure you, Madame Carver is no villain. She is a woman who has lived in the shadow of others' power, observing their flaws, their cruelties. If she knew of Dr. Vance's intentions, her silence was not malice, but a choice to protect, perhaps, or to survive. To accuse her without proof would be to destroy a life unjustly, and that, mon ami, is not the way of Hercule Poirot." Hastings sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I suppose you're right. It's just frustrating, knowing there might be more to the story." Poirot's eyes softened, and he leaned back in his chair, his hands folded neatly. "The story, Hastings, is never fully told. Each case, it is a window into the human soul, revealing both its darkness and its light. At Blackthorn Manor we saw greed, fear, resentment, but also courage. Clara's courage, Lady Beatrice's resilience, even Lionel's loyalty, however strained. The truth we uncovered was enough to bring justice, but the heart, it keeps its secrets." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Poirot's valet, George, entered with a silver tray bearing a letter. "For you, sir," he said, presenting it to Poirot with a slight bow. Poirot took the letter, his eyes narrowing as he recognized the elegant handwriting. "From Blackthorn Manor," he murmured, breaking the seal. He read in silence, his "Its way forward,"
Mademoiselle Wentworth will remain as governess, and Monsieur Lionel has taken on greater responsibilities. But there is one detail, Hastings, that may interest you. Hastings leaned forward, his eyes wide. Go on. Poirot's voice was soft, almost a whisper. Madame Carver has resigned. She left Blackthorn Manor this morning, citing a desire to retire to the country. Lady Beatrice notes that she departed with little explanation, only a request that her service be remembered kindly. Hastings' jaw dropped. She's gone? Just like that? Do you think she fled because of us? Poirot shook his head. No, Hastings, Madame Carver is not a woman to flee. Her departure, it is a choice, perhaps a recognition that her time at Blackthorn Manor is complete. Whether she knew of Dr. Vance's crime or not, she has chosen to step away from the shadows of that house, and in that there is a kind of resolution. Hastings sat back, his mind racing. It's almost as if she's confessing by leaving. Perhaps, Poirot said, his tone thoughtful. Or perhaps she is simply seeking peace. The human heart, it seeks balance, even in its silence. The room fell quiet. The only sound the gentle crackle of the fire in the grate. Hastings sipped his whiskey, his thoughts settling like dust after a storm. The case of Blackthorn Manor had been a journey through deception and revelation. And though the murderer was behind bars, the echoes of the crime lingered in the choices of those left behind. Poirot rose, adjusting his cuffs with his usual precision. Enough of the past, Hastings. Tomorrow we shall dine at the Savoy, and you shall regale me with tales of your golfing triumphs. For tonight, let us enjoy the order of this moment, the fire, the drink, the company of a friend. Hastings smiled, the weight of his questions easing. You're right, Poirot. A night of rest, and then back to the world. But I must say, you've a knack for making even the darkest cases feel meaningful. Poirot's eyes twinkled. It is the purpose of Hercule Poirot, mon ami, to find meaning in the chaos, to bring light to the shadows. And now, to bed. The world, it will have more puzzles for us tomorrow. As Hastings bid him good night and retired to his own rooms, the image of Blackthorn Manor faded into the warmth of Poirot's flat. The case was closed, the truth revealed. But the final echoes of its secrets would linger, a testament to the complexity of the human heart. Chapter 15. The Final Reflection. The drawing-room of Blackwood Manor was bathed in the soft glow of the late afternoon sun, its golden rays filtering through the tall windows and casting long shadows across the polished floor. The air was still, as though the house itself held its breath, awaiting the final words of Hercule Poirot. The suspects, now lingering disbelief. Captain Hastings stood near the fireplace, his notebook closed, his eyes fixed on his friend with an admiration that bordered on reverence. Poirot, immaculate in his tailored suit, stood at the center of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, his mustache perfectly symmetrical. His eyes, sharp and bright as ever, surveyed the assembly with a calm authority that belied the storm of revelations that had just passed. The case of Lady Eleanor Blackwood's murder had been laid bare, its intricate threads unraveled with the precision only Poirot's little grey cells could achieve. Yet, as was his custom, he was not content to leave the matter with merely the identification of the guilty. There was, he believed, a moral necessity to reflect, to illuminate the human condition that had led to such a tragedy. Mes amis, Poirot began, his voice clear and measured. The affair of Blackwood Manor is concluded, but it is not enough to know who and how. We must also ask why, for it is in the why that we understand the heart of the crime, and perhaps the heart of ourselves. He paced slowly, his polished shoes clicking softly against the floor. The murder of Lady Eleanor Blackwood was not a crime of passion,
nor of greed in the simple sense, though greed played its part. It was a crime born of fear. Fear of exposure, fear of loss, fear of a past that could not be undone. Miss Clara Blackwood, the niece who stood to inherit so much, believed that her aunt's decision to rewrite her will threatened not only her fortune, but her very identity. The letters, hidden so carefully in the secret drawer of the writing desk, revealed a truth Clara could not bear to face: her illegitimacy, a secret Lady Eleanor intended to make public to cleanse her conscience before her death.
Clara, seated pale and trembling, stared at the floor, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The others, Mr. Reginald Thorne, the solicitor, Dr. Harold Grayson, the family physician, Mrs. Beatrice Langley, the housekeeper, and young James Blackwood, the distant cousin, watched her with a mixture of pity and judgment. Poirot continued, his tone softening, but never losing its clarity.
The poison, administered so cleverly in the nightly tonic, was not chosen by chance. It was strychnine, a substance that requires knowledge and access, both of which Miss Clara possessed through her studies of chemistry and her proximity to Dr. Grayson's medical supplies. The timing, 8:47 p.m., as confirmed by the stopped clock in Lady Eleanor's room, was precise, for Clara knew her aunt's habits to the minute. The locked room, the absence of footprints in the snow outside,
Mademoiselle, constructed a web of deception. But you forgot one thing. The human heart cannot lie so perfectly as the mind. Your agitation when I questioned you about the letters, your insistence on the innocence of others, these were the threads that led me to you. The handkerchief embroidered with your initials, found near the desk, was not a mistake, but a subconscious confession. You wished to be caught, did you not? To be free of the burden of your secret. Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. Poirot's gaze softened, though his voice remained firm. You killed to protect a lie, but in doing so, you destroyed the very thing you sought to preserve, your place in this family. Lady Eleanor, in her final days, sought only truth and reconciliation. Had you trusted her, this tragedy might have been averted. He turned to the others, his expression one of quiet authority. Each of you, in your way, contributed to the shadows that cloaked this crime. Mr. Thorne, your silence about the new will, though motivated by loyalty, allowed suspicion to fester. Dr. Grayson, your failure to secure your medical supplies was a negligence that cost a life. Mrs. Langley, your devotion to the family blinded you to Clara's desperation. And Mr. James, your resentment of your cousin's inheritance fueled her fear of losing everything. We are all, in some measure, responsible for the conditions that breed such acts. The room was silent, the weight of Poirot's words settling over them like dust. Hastings, standing by the fireplace, felt a pang of sympathy for the broken figures before him. He had seen Poirot solve many cases, but this one, with its tangle of family secrets and human frailties, struck him as particularly poignant. Poirot adjusted his cufflinks, a small gesture that signaled the closing of his thoughts. The law will now take its course, he said. This Clara will face justice, as she must. But let us not forget that justice is not vengeance. It is a restoration of order, a reminder that truth, however painful, is the foundation of all that is good. Hercule Poirot does not judge. He observes, he deduces, he reveals. And now, my work here is done. He turned to Hastings, a faint smile playing beneath his moustache. Come, my friend. The air of Blackwood Manor grows heavy, and I long for the simplicity of a good cup of tisane and the quiet of my own thoughts. Hastings nodded, gathering his coat as the others began to disperse, their voices low and subdued. Clara was led away by the local constable, who had been waiting discreetly in the hall. The others drifted toward their rooms, each lost in their own reflections on the tragedy that had unfolded. As Poirot and Hastings
Glanced at his friend, marveling once again at the brilliance of the little Belgian detective. "Poirot," he ventured, "do you ever tire of it? The lies, the secrets, the darkness of it all?" Poirot paused, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "Tire, Hastings? Non, jamais. For every lie there is a truth waiting to be found. Every secret hides a story, and every darkness is but a shadow cast by the light of reason. It is my purpose, my friend, to bring that light. And so long as there are mysteries, Hercule Poirot will be there to solve them." They walked on in silence, the crunch of gravel beneath their feet the only sound. Behind them, Blackwood Manor stood as a testament to the fragility of human bonds and the enduring power of truth. The case was closed, but its echoes would linger, a reminder of the delicate balance between trust and betrayal, love and fear. And so, with the sun sinking below the horizon, Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings left Blackwood Manor behind, ready for the next mystery that awaited them in the world beyond.